Welcome to the Priority Zero podcast. Stories of service.
Welcome to the Priority Zero podcast. My name's Oresty, and today with us we have James Stewart. James is a paramedic and the Regional Manager Northern for St John Ambulance Northern Territory, who's come over to work with us for a bit from New Zealand. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on board, Oresty.
You're welcome, mate. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm from Christchurch in the South Island of New Zealand, which is the better of the two islands in New Zealand. So I was born and bred in just out of Rangiora, which is about 30 minutes north of Christchurch. We went to school in Christchurch and ultimately did a throwaway degree, as they call the degrees that you do, and then you do absolutely nothing to do with them and don't use them for your career. So I did a degree at the University of Canterbury. But I was always wanting to be a farmer or a police officer. Couldn't decide. So naturally, out of those two, I then went into paramedicine.
So you jumped around a little bit. So tell us a little bit about this. When you finished school, how did you decide what degree you wanted to do and what path you wanted to take?
I knew I always wanted to, it sounds really cliche, but I wanted to be involved in helping people. And it might have been for a slightly selfish reason, is that I just was never attracted by the corporate life. I knew that, whatever sense of self-belonging I was going to attain was going to come from actually helping people rather than, I'm not someone that looks at the bank account at the end of every week or whatever. So I knew it was going to be to do with something human service or social services derived. And so I started off by doing a Bachelor of Social Work at the University of Canterbury, and ended up coming out with a human services degree. And the reason I came out with a human services degree is because in the middle of my third year of the 4-year program, I was lucky enough to be offered a full-time job as an ambulance officer. And so I thought, I'll give that a crack. And so, just shipped off the rest of the degree while I was working full-time. And here we are, it all snowballed and got out of control.
So was it degree-based over there at the time?
Paramedicine I was one of, as I joined St John, New Zealand, there was an internal program that you could do to become a paramedic, and we called it ILS, or an intermediate life support over there. As I joined, it changed, so there was no opportunity for me to partake in that program. However, it's a very different service in New Zealand, and what I mean by that is that when I joined, predominantly ambulances were run by EMTs. There were a few paramedics, but it was more often that you had EMTs, or basic life support as we called it, ambulances. So in Christchurch, for example, out of the 7 or 8 trucks that would be on, only 2 or 3 of them would have fully paid crews. The rest of them would either be paid volunteer or purely volunteer crews. Probably 3 or 4 of them would have been paramedic, and the only intensive care paramedic would have been the shift supervisor and perhaps someone in a rapid response vehicle. And so they were obviously very busy backing up all of these EMT crews. EMTs back in New Zealand had quite an expansive scope, able to do quite a lot, so it was a really good skill set to have. But of course, it was only the paramedics that could come and put an IV in and give morphine and that kind of stuff.
How would you rate them compared to St John Northern Territory, to our patient transport or the advanced responder volunteers? It's similar?
Similar scope of practice in terms of interventions. However, in New Zealand, it's a 1,200 hour nominal hour of learning program. It's a level 5. And it's usually completed over 18 months. They are doing a full-time live-in residential course at the moment, which will get it done in 6 months. So similar scope of practice, but the learning involved is far higher. And I don't mean that by any means is that the PTO scope here is a lesser scope, but what the EMTs were able to do back home was quite broad. You could assess and treat someone and leave them at home. You could autonomously give you a whole host of medications without needing to seek advice or call for backup. And generally the level of clinical accountability on the EMTs is really high. And that's showing because there's always the rumour, and the rumour is in New Zealand that they're looking at actually registering the EMT workforce in the next couple of years, which is quite, I would think, quite interesting and important, because when I left, there were still more EMTs in St John, New Zealand than there were paramedics. So if there was a double paramedic ambulance, It was usually due to someone coming back on an overtime shift. Very rarely would there be a double paramedic ever rostered. It was always a paramedic EMT or a paramedic first responder.
Yeah, right. That's very different to the model we got up here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are absolutely pros and cons for both models. But I do, I look at the massive amount of learning that's done up in the Northern Territory, particularly the really high intern cohort we've got here. And I think that this is a really good environment to actually develop as a paramedic.
Like I was discussing with the podcast before this one, the episode hasn't come out yet with Jeff. He said the workload and the cases that we get here, we've got a lot of dialysis patients, a lot of people with rheumatic heart that we just don't see anywhere else.
Oh, the patients here are very sick. And I use that very, that really throwaway term again. They are extraordinarily sick. I was blown away, and I still have culture shock every day that I'm here, just due to the average acuity of patients. And the crews up here have normalised treating such unwell people, and predominantly it is that from health neglect, people that have not got the healthcare literacy to make sure that they are on top of their own health. It's the failed courses of medication. It's the inability to access that primary care network of GPs. And one thing that I know is a very safe statement, and one that certainly our colleagues in the tertiary healthcare centres will be saying, is that the average acuity of patient here is very ill in comparison to other places. For example, I came from Christchurch, which is a reasonably well-off place, and the average acuity we had a lot of worried well. We absolutely had our fair share of ill patients, but just the scale here proportionally is far higher of really medically unwell patients.
Yeah, right. So talk to me a little about working on the ambulance in New Zealand there. So you said you paired up with an EMT. Tell me a little bit about the program that you went through to become a qualified paramedic there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in New Zealand, you start off as a first responder. You go into when I started, it was a 4-day course. I think it's now about a 3-week course. And as a first responder, you were trained all of the physical skills. So you were trained IM injections. You were trained how to use an OPA and LMA, which are airways, and you were trained how to defibrillate, run a CPR, essentially perform all of the elements of a resuscitation apart from cannulating and giving drugs. And that was a really cool skill set. So I did that course, and I was really lucky in Christchurch. If you joined in Christchurch Metro, you were supposed to do events for a year. But because I joined in an outlying centre, I joined in Rangiora, I was straight on the ambulance. So 4-day course, and I was on the ambulance 2 up. So I was working alongside an ambulance-based intensive care paramedic who was a really lovely guy. He was one of my very early clinical role models. And on my first shift, we went out to a cardiac arrest, and of course, completely overwhelmed. I've got no idea what's going on. I've got no muscle memory. I've got no competence with any of the equipment beyond having sat this course. I've never even done an observing shift.
So you done 4 days in the classroom, hit the first shift.
Yep.
First shift, you got that call over the radio, cardiac arrest. What was going through your head when you heard that over the radio?
Oh, it's exhilarating initially, isn't it? Oh my gosh, this is the job. This is so exciting. And so away we go. And then when you arrive, I think people from outside of, I want to say, the emergency services probably don't understand. Everything is far more real. You go on and soak in the absolute trauma the family are feeling. These people are distraught. It's the worst day of their life. And so that naive exhilaration really rapidly gave way to almost terror as you go in and you think, oh my gosh, I've actually got a burden here. I need to deliver these people are expecting an amazing service here, and I need to live up to it and provide. And so you're trying to do everything that you've been trained to do. In the first responder course there, two of the days were focused on cardiac arrest. So that was the one thing that we were very well versed in. But nothing is a substitute for experience, is it? So so obviously you go there, go through the motions. That was pre the fire service turning out to cardiac arrest in those days. So fortunately, it was very well resourced with paramedics and stuff, which after everyone else arrived enabled me to take more of a helicopter learning seeing what everyone was doing, watching this person be intubated, watching them be cannulated, watching everyone go through the algorithm, and it gave me my very first building blocks for how this actually works in practice. Unfortunately, it was an unsuccessful outcome for the patient, but again, it really put home to me that actually being a paramedic, it's nothing about you, it's everything about the patient and their families. And I just remember that the absolute sorrow and regret I felt watching the family be told that their loved one was no longer with us. And it wasn't entirely unanticipated. This person was in their late 70s, early 80s, I can't remember exactly, but yeah, that definitely shifted it from being an exhilarating, oh my gosh, these lights and sirens are cool and I'm going to have such a great time, to being in uniform, in the same uniform that people have studied for 7 or 8 years to wear. You've got a real strong social contract with patients and with the public, and so that kind of generated a really strong interest in learning and making sure that I was being the best clinician I could be. Usually there was a 2-year stand down from when you were a first responder to when you could apply for an EMT pathway. I was really lucky. I managed to get on one almost straight away. So after 6 months, it was a 6-month part-time course, but of course I was just doing uni on the side kind of thing, so I just got stuck into it and completed it really, really quickly and became, again, a very, very green EMT. Looking back, I was not an unsafe clinician, but I was certainly, a very green clinician, and I very much erred on the side of caution, probably took some patients to hospital that probably didn't need to be there, but that's all about learning. And my first solo shift as an EMT, where it was just me and a first responder, happened around about almost a year after I joined the ambulance service. And I just remember thinking, well, I've got no one to fall back on now. And, the first patient we went to was, again, just by luck of the draw, a really unwell, complex, continuous seizing patient. And trying to manage that in the absence of advanced knowledge or advanced medications was really challenging. But, obviously you just go through your algorithm, and very fortunate in Christchurch or in Canterbury, it was a learning environment that senior clinicians, the senior paramedics, were really, really enabling and permitting and supportive. And yeah, that enabled me to accrue skills really quickly, because people were really open with feedback that weren't derogatory.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah, and I would certainly label Rangiora Station and the Canterbury District in general as just one of the most amazing formative learning places, just enabling that skill accrual.
And with that seizing patient, being an EMT, having an EMT and first responder, did you have access to things like midazolam to be able to administer that to the patient?
Not at that stage. So now all ambulances carry midazolam for that setting in New Zealand, but back then they didn't. So we just focused on ABCs, making sure that we were getting oxygenation on board, preparing everything so you're able to get everything out for the responding paramedic crew, and essentially reassuring everyone, but just going back to ABCs, having some oxygen on, making sure the airway was clear, having your suction ready to go, trying to get whatever obs and vitals you could, and making sure that you're getting all of that information back to the responding crews so that they know what they're walking into, and all while trying to appear calm while doing it, because of course the worst thing you can do as a junior crew member is panic, because the family's looking at you thinking, well, these guys, the people that care for us are here. And so the last thing you want to do is appear frazzled, because that just can send a family off, as we know, into an absolute tailspin.
Yeah, exactly. And I had Rob Webster on my podcast episode, I think it was episode 3, and he was a paramedic with St. John and went on to become a duty manager now as a police officer. And we got into the discussion about, going on site, and the family may not remember who you were or what you look like, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Yes.
So I think that's really, really important to be able to keep that composure. And I guess being quite green coming into it, you build on these skills and you build your resilience. And when you put on the uniform, I guess it's kind of a persona or a shield, when you go out there, because you're representing the company.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yep, absolutely. And it's also a bit of a commitment to people as well, which is why, we need to hold ourselves to a really high standard, because people have an expectation of us, and we are one of the very few professions that, because of our uniform, are granted unrestricted access into people's homes and lives. When we think about it, very few other people would be able to do that. If a doctor or a police officer turned up to people's doors, they wouldn't get the same buy-in But because we're ambulance staff, people know that our role is to go into your home and assess you and get all that information and get you to hospital, get you to the most appropriate care. It's a really unique position to be in, and it's a really highly trusted profession. And that's why we're really keen on making sure that we're being professional and we're giving people what they expect, which is really good healthcare.
Yeah, the respect that I guess the uniform gives you is quite astounding, actually. When I went through my induction process with St. John, it was Sue Gullery that took my induction process. I believe you know Sue.
Yeah, I do.
All right, so she literally told us that the day we got issued our uniform, you will go to Casual Intake, which is a shopping centre, which is near the ambulance centre. People move out the way for you. People look at you differently. And I was just like, I kind of brushed it off. But, when we put on that uniform for the first time, we were so proud. We walked in the shop and she was right. Mm. Like you walk in there, people look at, oh, do you just want to get in front of me? You must be busy, things like that. And it's crazy.
Absolutely. It's because I believe it's partly because we are universally there to help. And I really feel for our colleagues in the police because, of course, they're not greeted warmly at every house they go to by any means.
No, exactly.
Whilst they're equally as respected and they've got the same profession to uphold, it's really challenging because, of course, they go to some really complex scenes where, of course, they're not going to be greeted as well. And, of course, paramedics and patient transfer officers, we get assaulted and we aren't always greeted warmly. But on average, we are universally seen as a highly trusted people, there to help, there to provide healthcare. People give us, the most intimate details of their lives and the complete trust that we're not going to abuse their trust. And I think that's an amazing position to be in. And I often think we take it for granted because it's normal to us now, because that's what we do day in and day out. You might do 7 or 8, 9 jobs in a shift, and but it's impossible not to normalise it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're very lucky with what we do. So how long was it before you went from an EMT transition over to paramedic? What was your study like, the length?
So to be a paramedic then, at that stage you needed to do a degree. So I did a degree via Whitireia, which is just north of Wellington in Porirua. So that's a full 3-year degree, but they give you some cross-crediting for being a current practicing EMT. So it chops it down to just over 2 years. And then obviously after that, you can do an internship. So I became an EMT and then straight away started doing a degree. And then straight after that, started hunting around for internships. It was about this stage as well that my career path started digressing. So 2015, I was offered a role of building the hub in Christchurch. And what the hub was is traditionally we'd have ambulance stations right around Christchurch. And we moved to a hub and spoke model, which is having one central building that would house the entire fleet of, at that stage, I think it was 22 ambulances. And there would be permanent cleaners there that would clean and restock your ambulances. And we used to go and rent motels or lease houses or whatever that could fit an ambulance outside, and make sure they were nice. Everything, they all had like St. John computers and all of that kind of stuff at them. It was to make sure that we weren't investing millions of dollars in a station where we don't know where the population will shift, because of course the population of Christchurch is really transient after the earthquake.
So it's like a bit of a pilot program.
Yeah, it worked really well. I believe it worked really, really well. It certainly meant that we were getting out to people quicker because, if we knew that we were getting lots and lots of workload in a certain area, we'd just go and rent a house there, fit it out to be a station, and then all of a sudden you've got a really, really proximate response. And the only, everything started falling off again when it became much like it is here, where ambulances are just responding from hospital a lot nowadays, just because the workload's increased so much. So that was a really cool opportunity to be given in Canterbury, and that started off my management career. So from that role, I then became a territory manager in Oamaru in Otago, which is about 3 hours south of Christchurch. And that has certainly been the role where I've learned the most as a leader in the ambulance service. And it's probably the role where I was forced to admit that, I don't know everything. And actually your staff often know a lot more than you. And sometimes all you need to do is be there with a smile, a coffee or a company credit card to make things better, rather than needing to find solutions for everything. I was a really young territory manager. I was a 24-year-old territory manager, and that obviously whilst I think I was given a really great opportunity by the manager at the time to do that role, it enabled me to do some really rapid learning. I was managing predominantly an older workforce of paramedics who I think put me through a few tests and trials and let me learn a lot, but it's certainly done a lot to craft the manager I am today, or the leader I try to be today, which is really consultative. You know, I try to just lean on the competency of people around me, and I'm really lucky here because I've got such an amazing group of managers around me that I can, you know, ask any question and I'm not made to feel an idiot. I think that was a really defining point in my career.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially coming from a leader, to be able to openly say, I don't know the answer.
Yep.
It's really empowering because it allows you, you know, everyone's human. No one knows everything. Soon as I see a manager or someone go, yep, I know how to do everything, straight away I'm like, nah, no one knows everything. Everyone can learn something from someone. You know what I mean? And I think that's a good trait to have as a manager.
And it's interesting because being a younger manager, or being any manager actually, you've got to choose whether you're going to be people's friend or people's leader or people's manager. And you can do both, but you can't ever try to be someone's friend because that completely undermines you, you know, and you've lost the race essentially the moment you start compromising your decisions. And it means being unpopular. And I've made some unpopular decisions that were absolutely the wrong ones. And looking back on it now, I've absolutely made a few really poor decisions. And one thing that I'm always really careful to do is that I absolutely go back to the team afterwards and say, look, I got this wrong, team, and this is why. And I've noticed that the people around me have actually supported me through that a lot more. Even the teams that I've made bad decisions for have said, I've got this wrong, this is why, and how can we make it right? I've got a lot more buy-in from that, perhaps sometimes even getting it right, which has been really, really interesting. And through that, I've actually developed some really good friends as well that have absolutely stuck with me through my whole career.
It builds respect.
Yep.
In the end, no one knows everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really, really, really cool times down in Oamaru. And then a couple of years later, I was offered the opportunity I was promoted to a national ops manager of volunteering in New Zealand. So in New Zealand, at that stage, we had around 3,000 volunteers, ambulance volunteers, that ran pretty much all of the remote and rural ambulance services for New Zealand. So over the last probably 10 years, New Zealand went from being a predominantly volunteer with quite a few paid staff to being double crewed paid throughout the country, which in hindsight was a brilliant decision. At the time, we thought, oh no, you're taking opportunities away from volunteers. But in hindsight, with the way the world's gone and with the decreasing availability of volunteers, it was absolutely the right thing to do. But volunteers still provide supplementary response at peripheral stations to large cities, and all of the remote rural responses are still done by volunteers on emergency ambulances. And
wow, that's something we don't have here. All our volunteers are generally events-based.
And so it's quite common. You'll see volunteers working in some metro centres, and the standards that they're held to are exactly the same as the standards of paid officers, and everyone understands that. One of the things I found out is that I'd actually often rather have a volunteer EMT working with me that's been in the job for 10 years than a brand new paid EMT. Just that skills accrual over that really, really long amount of time. Additionally, some of a story that I always reminisce back to when I'm thinking about skill sets is coming from a metro centre, and obviously having been an EMT, I was blown away when I went to work in Oamaru, which is remote and rural, and Kurau is a township about 35 minutes north, and it's about 3 hours drive to hospital, 2.5, long way to home. And they were all EMTs and first responders, that crew, and they had some of the sickest patients I've ever seen. They'd go to shootings, they'd go to STEMIs, they'd go to all sorts of cardiac arrests, traumatic cardiac arrests, and the outcomes they generated through being really good at the basics and being really knowledgeable about the more advanced things that needed to follow, I'd strongly believe save some lives. Absolutely black and white save some lives. And so, if I had a cardiac arrest, I'd actually rather have a really good EMT coming to me than an okay paramedic.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Just resource my arrest with the Kurau crew and I'd be fine.
Far out.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about some of your most memorable moments working in New Zealand? Obviously, the environment's a lot different over there. You guys get a lot of snow and really cold weather, which we don't have, especially in the Northern Territory. Is there any jobs that kind of stand out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the first jobs that completely overwhelmed me as a new paid officer. I had a casual gig as a CSO, and I was still an EMT at this stage, and I was responsible for going around and delivering first responder trainings, which I loved. It was a great, and so you jump into a van, and it was full of mannequins and kit, and you drive all over the country. So I did all of the South Island, and I really enjoyed it. And I was coming back from Greymouth one day, which is on the west coast, through the pass in between Greymouth and Christchurch, and it's quite windy. It's a really good drive actually. And I heard on the radio that there was an MVA about 30 minutes in front of me, and the ambulance was about 30 minutes behind me. And I was pretty new at this stage. I was very good theoretically, but not super crash hot in terms of practically. And as I was driving to it, so of course you light everything up and away we go. And as I was driving to it, I heard more and more over the radio that, one of the patients was starting to stop breathing, and there were multiple patients there, and there were bones sticking out of places they shouldn't be in and bits and pieces. And again, that sense of, do I have the competence for this? And arriving, and it was my first fatal car accident that I'd been to, and I was alone, and I was pretty isolated. And I was really lucky. A patient transfer officer happened to be driving past as well. We stopped and helped out, but a car had been going way too quick and spun out around this corner and hit another car had hit it head on. And there was one deceased and one person whose legs were up around their ears that had their feet up on the dashboard. And obviously the airbag had gone off, and that wasn't very good. So that is probably the most memorable. That's the job that sticks in my head, because at that stage I was out of radio reception, I was out of cell phone reception.
There's no backup. There's nothing.
I knew there was an ambulance coming somewhere, but 30 minutes is a very long time when you're pretty isolated. And as an EMT, I had methoxyflurane and Entonox, and that was it. So trying to get this person almost sedated on this was a challenge.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, methoxy, you've actually got to constantly keep taking that for it to work. If you stop taking it, it wears off, and you only get about 5 or 7 minutes out of it.
Yeah. So, and you can only give it twice, because of course it's fine for your kidneys and things, but it's not great for them.
So it's 3 mils per dose, 6 mils per day, or 15 mils per week.
Yeah. So like that was a really, really significant job for me. I guess the other significant things that I've been involved in is, everyone can remember their most traumatic jobs or whatever, which to me, absolutely black and white was, and it's quite ironic. In Oamaru, we used to do they do it here, and it's called Street Smart, where you crash a car in an auditorium and get all the kids in to come and look at it and explain what happens with the patients, and explain what happened to all these kids with a deceased person. And you work it into a scenario where, they've all been out drinking and someone decides to drive. And it's a really good program. And in Oamaru, they were humming and hawing about having it, because I think some parents had decided that it was a bit too confronting for their kids. And in that year, I think in Oamaru, which is a very little town, there were 4 or 5 car accidents which resulted in the fatalities of kids in between 14 to 17. And the worst one I went to, I was late to, but a car had gone straight through a T intersection that obviously been driving really, really quickly, and they'd been going up the bottom of the T and just gone straight over the top into someone's rock garden outside their house. Who'd obviously been a bit frustrated with cars appearing in his lawn. So I'd built a nice rock wall, which is fair enough, and the rock wall was full of tussocks, which was long grass just crawling up, and so really common in Otago is tussock, and also they'd been driving this car quite hard, so it was really hot. And one of the patients was ejected out of the window, and unfortunately the others, they were all trapped in that car. They were all in some semblance of consciousness, and the tussocks below the car caught fire, which then caught the car on fire. And that was really confronting, because by the time I got there, there was just a wall of heat, and you could see the people inside, but the wall of heat was too strong to get through. And I'll always remember chatting to the cop after that who arrived prior to me, and he really struggled with that, as anyone would have, because it's they're just there, they're 2 arms lengths away. And the frontline crew that went to that were really lucky. We had some really experienced people on the ambulance that went to that. But yeah, that's kind of one of the saddest things. And I think all of the resistance to running that Drive to Survive program fell away, and people were quite happy that it ran the next year. But that was undoubtedly horrific.
It's important to run these programs, because I even think back to when I was young. You think you're young, you think you're invincible, and that's just because you're young. Like, it hasn't sunk in that, hey, I can actually die.
Mate, when I was 15, in New Zealand, you get your driver's license when you're 15, and you get your learners, and you sit on that for 6 months, and you get restricted, and you can drive any car. There's no rules around cars or whatever. So I did the natural thing and went and bought myself a turbocharged Subaru, and I was invincible, absolutely. And the things I did there, by the grace of God, go way, I think. And I think that's really important as a clinician as well, is to, when you go to some young guy that's wrapped his car around a pole, it's not actually a blame game. It's not actually saying, hey, look, you're an idiot for doing this. I think about how lucky I am to not have done that, because the reason I haven't done that wasn't due to my skill. It was due to luck. I had no skill. I was 15 and a half. I know
exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and so I think I also find the best clinicians are, the ones that probably have had a bit too much to drink on the occasional night, because then when you're treating people, especially if you live in a uni town, and you're treating these people that have had too much to drink or in a spot of bother, the really good clinicians are the ones that say, hey, mate, we've all been there, it's okay, we're going to look after you, rather than saying, well, why do you drink this much? And it's that empathy, which I think is so integral, and I think people with that life experience just have it.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the whole uniform thing that we're talking about, being a trusted profession. Like, you can take drugs, you can drink, we don't care. We just want to know, when we ask these questions, what you take, so we can best treat you to make sure what you've taken doesn't contraindicate with what we're trying to give you to help you. Like, there's no, I don't want to say legal implications, but you know what I mean? We're not out to rat on you.
Oh, totally. And it's really important as well. If people lie to us about what drugs they've taken, we might give you a drug that doesn't match so nicely with the one you've just taken, and that could have a really negative outcome. And but I am pretty safe in saying that most of the clinicians that I've come across in my career are so non-judgmental, because by the time you've been working in comms or working on the front line for 6 months, you've probably seen most of it, and nothing really surprises you anymore. And if you run into someone and say, oh, look, I've taken all these drugs and I'm having a bad trip and whatever, there's no judgment associated to that, because actually I've seen so many of these people before. They're actually really nice people, and we delineate what you do from your personality, which I think is really important, because some great people make some really dumb choices, and that's your right to make dumb choices.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So how long were you in New Zealand before you made the switch and decided to come over to Australia?
So I worked for St John NZ for 10 years, just on the dot. And then, my wife and I, Jo, my wife's an extended care paramedic in New Zealand, and we thought, we'll go to Australia, because I didn't want to be someone that's just worked for one ambulance service their entire life, and wanted to diversify. But also, I really liked the idea of coming to Australia and working, and so I saw this job come up, the regional manager role, and I was really excited, and I thought I'll apply for that. And Jo was looking at doing some remote nursing jobs. She's also a nurse and stuff, and I was fortunate enough to be offered this role, and absolutely not unfortunately, but unanticipatedly, we also found out that Jo was pregnant at about the same time, which was very, very cool, and it's been an amazing journey. But what it transpired is that we came across here, and Jo wasn't looking for work anymore. She was just gonna be a mum, which was gonna be really cool. A year later, here we are, and the reason that I'm looking at going back, I'm moving back to New Zealand in October, is one of the things that I think we've struggled with is all of our family and support networks and structures are based in Canterbury. And while everyone here has been so kind, I think that drive to get back to family is really strong. And that's one thing I think that, I really need to highlight, is that the kindness of people in the Northern Territory has blown me away. the amount of offers I've had to come around for dinner, the amount of offers of anything you need, shirt off your back kind of people has been phenomenal. And that's from inside and outside of St John. But it's just blown me away, that genuine kindness. And I think maybe it's a defining thing of the NT, because I've been to other areas in Australia before, and it's not the same. I think the NT, people that live in the NT are a special breed and just very kind. And maybe it's because it's such a harsh climate, and it's a harsh area to live in where everything's out to kill you.
It's true.
But yeah, within the first week I'd been here, I'd had offers to furnish my house from half a dozen people who I didn't know from a bar of soap, who had no vested interest in helping me, and I didn't know what to do with it. I'm not used to this. And so, yeah, that's just something that I still am getting used to, is that genuine kindness.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about your role within St John up here that you've been working on for the last 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been, I look after Darwin, which is 4 ambulance stations at it, and then I look after Catherine, which has 2 ambulances running out of it. And then I look after Nhulunbuy, which has 1 ambulance running out of it, plus an recent addition of a PTS crew. So I look after, there's 3 people that directly report to me, which is the area manager of Nhulunbuy, area manager of Catherine, and manager ops of Darwin. But also, direct reports of me technically are the rosters team, but they support the whole territory. It's a really interesting role. As I said earlier, I've still been in complete culture shock with I didn't realise before I came, and I should have done some research, that Darwin has 6 times the average level of Indigenous Aboriginals in it, which was a culture shock to me, because it's so far different from where I've come from. In Christchurch, it's not a hugely diverse city. It's got some diversity in it, but nothing like Darwin. And so that's been an amazing learning journey for me. But I also didn't realise we had 12 times the level of national homelessness, which of course is such a predisposing factor into how we must deliver an ambulance service, because a lot of the structures that have been implemented elsewhere won't work as well here. Having a job-based ECP here wouldn't be as effective as having more of an ECP clinic where we enable the ECPs to take appointments or make appointments with these people, so we can actually deliver healthcare in people's own environment rather than get people to integrate with our system, because that clearly doesn't work. So I think, whilst there's huge opportunity up here, it's certainly so different, and I still get culture shock every day. I must admit, initially I was really ignorant, and I'll be open about that. I made some assumptions when I arrived in Darwin that have been proven completely wrong. I went through and saw these hordes of homeless people, and it made me really, really sad. And of course, you jump to how can we fix this? And I then did some learning, obviously not being Australian, about the huge issues that this country has had regarding our relations with people of other races, and particularly First Nations. And I realised how privileged we were in New Zealand. We don't have it perfect in New Zealand by any means, but we have a treaty. We have all of these things that guarantee so much, and that's something that I can see is just so different here. And I'd like to think these are contentious statements, but they're not, because the data reflects it. And I think that St John NT does a really good job of delivering a first-class ambulance service to people regardless of what ethnicity they are. But also there are inherent challenges at delivering healthcare to some people regardless of race who don't have a fixed address. We can't send them documents. We can't. You can't arrange easily for follow-ups. You can't. You never know where to find them to make sure they're compliant with their medications, and that's a real challenge. And that's something that I'm still blown away with. But I've also learned a lot about the richness of the Aboriginal culture, and I feel very privileged that people have taken some time to take me through that. And I have a huge respect for the culture, of the absolute richness of the culture, and I want to say the toughness of the Aboriginal people.
Yeah, look, the Northern Territory is definitely a unique place. Can you talk to me about some of the differences between working in New Zealand and Australia, case-wise?
Yeah, totally. I think one of the biggest things is in the territory, we assess a lot more people outdoors or in an uncontrolled environment, which is very different. So the vast majority of patients I would assess in New Zealand would be inside and in a home and in an environment where I could get some understanding of their kind of ability of to live. And what I mean by that is whenever you go and assess a patient that's not actively dying, I'll always be nosy and have a look in their fridge, because if their fridge is full and it's full of in-date food, they're clearly coping. Whereas if it's got mouldy food in it, or it's looking a bit neglected, or it's empty, I'm thinking this person's, something's going on, or they're not coping to live at home. In the territory, I can't go through and look at someone's house and think, oh, it's a bit messy. Are they struggling? Are they having mobility issues? Because I'm assessing them on a sidewalk or on just by virtue of the fact that there are a lot of people without a fixed address here. And I guess the other thing that I personally have felt is I am myself mouldy, so I feel a really strong connection with mouldy people, and I feel a really strong connection to supporting them, and I didn't have that connection when I came to the NT, and that's been a really interesting kind of piece of self-reflection for me as a clinician is, how do I cope with this absolute lack of connection, because it's something that is so foreign to me, literally foreign. I'm from another country, and that took probably a couple of months till I built up that kind of understanding of the Aboriginal and First Nations cultures, so that I could understand it enough to be conversant in it and be able to deliver healthcare that's actually really appropriate. And that's probably a key element of what I consider to be a good clinician. And I don't think anyone could come into the territory from another country and say they were a good clinician for a couple of months until they've actually seen some of it and done some of it. The difference in the case mix is very much also in terms of acuity. I would say the acuity is higher in the territory, and that's predominantly because people will wait for longer, will let their conditions deteriorate to the point where they're no longer able to function, as opposed to in New Zealand, people are quicker, I guess, to seek help through that primary healthcare network, and then work towards the outcome from there. So the trauma here is in the NT is worse. I just think that the amount of trauma that the team have normalised is absolutely prolific. The amount of people that get hit by cars, or the amount of vehicle accidents up here comparatively are so much higher. And I don't know what the causes for that are, but it's tangible. I would say more of the workload in New Zealand was medical, whereas here it's more evenly split between trauma and medical, far more catered towards medical, obviously, but there is comparatively more trauma. And I think I just go back to that whole, the amount of sick patients here, and it's the hyperkalemic patients, it's the patients that have complex healthcare needs here, which then of course means that as a clinician you need to be far more aware of some of the complexities of their healthcare needs. I would say that the population in Christchurch certainly was a more well population, and the population here is one with far more diverse healthcare requirements.
Yep. One of the interesting things that, if you're not from the NT or, Darwin, I've never travelled here before, is, a lot of the homeless population have things called bush camps, and it'll actually be a place where they conjugate and they all sleep together in a bush environment. That's commonly known to us within the industry, but not known to the general public.
Yeah. I would encourage, if anyone, from outside of Australia or even people that have worked in metro centres in Australia, the delivery of healthcare here is so much different than anything I've ever been previously exposed to. And going for a ride along in an ambulance in the NT is an eye-opening experience.
And you're not the first person to say that I've had on the podcast. I haven't had many people, but generally everyone that's come on has said something very similar to you. The things that we see, the conditions that we have, the comorbidities that we see in our patients, the vast distances sometimes that we have to travel, the environment, it's just very different.
Yeah, and I will also, absolutely acknowledge clinicians here are tough. Clinicians here put up with so much abuse and challenges and I think that the toughness of the average and I'm not going to say paramedics because it's PTOs and paramedics. I think that the team in the NT can be really proud of just what strong clinicians and strong people they are. The caseload that some of the team here experience in their first year of being an intern is so diverse and so high acuity in parts of it that I think if speaking as a manager who hires people, I would hire a territory clinician because I know they'll be an absolutely well-rounded, polished clinician.
If I'm reading between the lines here, so if there's paramedics out there that want to gain a lot of experience, this would be a great place for them to come. Is that right?
Totally. And I wish that I'd known about this 10 years ago when I was starting my career. Because, if I was starting again, I would come and try and do an internship in the territory. And because, just the breadth of case mix. And I would absolutely go and work in Tennant Creek for a month and Gove for a month and, try and get soak it all up because, again, the environments are so different in these places and you're going to see some of the most stunning things and as well as be presented with some of the most complex challenges you'll ever face. If I could have another go, that's absolutely the way I'd play it. And so even as a qualified paramedic coming across here, people will have a really good time if they wanted to have a bit of a change, coupled with the fact that the pay rates here are really, really good, compared to other places.
Yeah, and the leave that we get is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, 10 weeks of annual leave a year is very attractive. It's hard to...
Yeah, and rostered as well. Literally, you're doing 2 day shifts, 2 night shifts, 4 days off. You do that for 4 months and you get every 5th month off.
Yeah, it's a pretty good deal here. It's a very good deal, actually. I'm somewhat envious because I work Monday to Friday and I don't get 10 weeks off. But I also think that well-earned. The people working the 4 on 4 off patterns and going out and working in 40-degree heat inside some really uncomfortable environments. Yeah, by the time your leave comes around, I feel like you've earned it.
Yeah, 100%. And if anyone's considering coming to the Northern Territory, another good perk of working with St. John is your salary sacrifice. Obviously, being a not-for-profit organisation, we get to do a lot of salary sacrifice as well, which is great. What's your plans for the future? You've told us you're going back to the land of the long white cloud, I think they call it.
Yeah, I'm going back to Te Waipounamu, which is the South Island, so obviously I've got a 5-month-old child now who is really healthy, doing everything right. So I've picked up a role as a district operations manager in Canterbury. So that looks after, for anyone who is bored and on Google Maps, it looks after from the Waitaki River up to around Kaikoura. So it's a reasonably big district. It's got a really well-performing team there at the moment. So I'm looking forward to getting stuck into that. But I must admit, my priorities have somewhat changed. If you asked me this question 3 years ago, it would be, I want to be a director, and I want to be a director as soon as possible. In the last few years of being a manager and realising that I actually, it's like being a clinician. The more you learn, the more you realise you don't know. And I'm actually quite comfortable to just take some steps and actually just enjoy the moment a little bit more, learn a lot more about the roles that I'm currently in, learn a lot more from the people around me, and actually spend a lot more time with my family. So I was really career driven up until, and that's not to say I'm no longer career driven at all, but I guess, having a kid changes your perspective on a whole bunch of stuff.
Sure does.
And so, if I don't get that next big promotion or whatever, that's absolutely okay. I am so excited to get back and step into the Canterbury district though, because it's been really well looked after. It's had a very, very good manager in there currently, and it's got a really high performing team. So I'm just looking forward to getting back in there and finding my feet and continuing on that kind of path to greatness that place is on. But I don't really have any longer term plans other than just, watch my kid grow up.
So how do you feel about your kid being an Aussie?
Yeah, look,
the only Aussie in the family, mate.
Yeah, no, he's, as long as he doesn't come out with that twang, we'll be all right. But I must admit, it's very cool. The old birth certificate says born at Royal Darwin. And so that's something a bit different because, and we're obviously going to come back because it's a bit of a shame. Got all these pictures of him holding little crocodiles and doing all that kind of stuff. I can't remember it. So, obviously we'll be back, and we might be back for a job or we might be back for a holiday. You never know.
Gonna have to do it all over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dude, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. You've shared some really, really good stories and really good insights with us, about the ambulance service through New Zealand and, you're coming to Australia. I think it's good insight for people and it's good inspiration. So,
thank you so much for having me. It's great to have a chat.
Thanks, mate. We'll definitely speak to you again down the line.
Beautiful.
Cheers.
Thank you for tuning into the Priority Zero podcast. We greatly appreciate your dedicated listenership. If you are interested in being featured as a guest on our show, we welcome you to reach out to us through our official channels on Facebook or Instagram. Alternatively, you can contact us via email at contact@priorityzero.com.au. We value your support in helping us spread these compelling stories to a wider audience. Kindly consider liking and sharing these episodes, as it plays a crucial role in our mission to reach as many people as possible.